How much cash should you have in retirement? That's the question that we're going to answer today. Thanks for joining me. I'm Elliot Apple, founder of Kindness Financial Planning. Today, we're talking about cash in retirement. It is one of the most common questions I receive. How much cash should I have in retirement? People ask me that very frequently because it's this uncomfortable transition from an accumulation phase to a distribution phase. And trying to figure out how much money you should have to help with that transition and then later on is a difficult question to answer. So first, let's talk about what is cash. Cash is easily accessible. It's readily available there with a few clicks of your mouse or in your wallet. It's not cash that's in a life insurance policy. It's not cash that's tied up in a CD. It's not tied up in other things that it's hard to get it out of it. It's a liquid thing. First, why is cash important? For one, it's important for spending purposes and emergencies that pop up. Two, it's going to help with the transition to retirement. As I talked about earlier, it's uncomfortable to go from saving money your entire life to now spending it. So it's going to help ease that transition. And then three, just peace of mind. Cash isn't going to have the same fluctuations as stocks or bonds. It's going to be there. When you log into your bank account, the value is not going to change very much like it would with an investment portfolio. So that peace of mind is really important, particularly with that transition to retirement. Let's talk about some of the common rules of thumb that you'll hear about cash. Oftentimes I hear numbers such as 3 to 6 months, 12 months, and even potentially 2+ years of cash. Now, I want to preface this by saying there is no right or wrong answer. Everybody is different. I've worked with people who want 3 months of cash on hand all the way up to 5 years in the past. So that is a very varied number to have available. And for each person, it's different depending on their spending levels. But I think about it from the perspective of what are you most comfortable with? This isn't necessarily an economic question or what makes the most sense financially. It's what makes sense here. Where do I feel comfortable? Where am I going to have the least amount of regret? For 3 to 6 months worth of living expenses, the pros here are that most of your money can then be invested, earning a rate of interest. Now, this isn't going to work in every market environment. There'll be periods where it's down, but since the market's up more often than it is down, this is going to benefit you likely longer term because more of that money is going to be invested. Cash isn't going to be a drag on the returns. Now, the con is if you go through an extended bear market where the market's declining or declines really rapidly or it takes a long time for it to recover, it can be really uncomfortable holding smaller amounts of cash because then you have to decide, how am I going to raise cash for my spending purposes? Am I going to take it from stocks? Am I going to take it from bonds? Which asset class am I going to sell during those time periods? If your aim is to hold about 12 months worth of living expenses, this is sort of an in-between answer for a lot of people because it gives you enough time to go through a lot of stock market declines and still feel okay because you know for the next 12 months, you know exactly where your spending is going to come from. You have a bucket of cash there to spend from. Downside is you're having a little more cash on hand, so it will be a drag likely on investment returns long term if the market does well. But the pro again is it provides a little more peace of mind. There's a little more of a cushion there. You can see it in your bank account when the market's down 30+%. You can think, oh, hey, I have this cash on hand. I feel okay. I know where it's going to come from. For those in the 2 years plus worth of living expenses, the pro here is, again, peace of mind. You know for the next 2 years exactly where your spending can come from. You don't have to worry about your portfolio being down. If you read the news about the stock market, you're probably going to feel a little bit better than the people who only have 3 months worth of living expenses. So there is that comfort level. Now the con here is this may be a drag on returns long term. If you have 2 years worth of cash, it's likely not earning a ton. Rates have come up recently, and so it's earning a slightly higher yield than it would have a year ago, but it's still probably not as much as a blended portfolio of stocks and bonds. So it will be a drag, but for some people, again, going back to the idea that this is more of an emotional decision, that's okay. They're willing to give up that rate of return for the peace of mind that comes with it. As you can see, there is no perfect amount of cash to hold on hand. It really comes down to what is comfortable for you. In my experience, I have found a little more cash heading into retirement, more so than people are maybe naturally inclined to hold, is usually not a bad thing. Because again, that stage where you're accumulating to decumulating and you're spending from your assets, it can be a rough transition. It can be awkward, and having a little more cushion, a little more peace of mind usually is a good thing. And you can always adjust it. This doesn't have to be a one and done decision. You could revisit this a year later, 5 years later, as your life changes. It may be a time to come back and say, okay, I had this much at some point and I'm okay holding a little bit less. I understand how this is going to work now. I feel more comfortable with retirement. Stock market's done well. Whatever the reasons, you can revisit it. I do want to spend some time talking about where I wouldn't hold cash, because I see a lot of sort of far-flung theories about where you should hold cash or where you could hold cash. And it's a little bit out there for me. I think I've seen a lot of people make mistakes in these areas. So let's get into it. One, I wouldn't count on a home equity line of credit or a HELOC available for cash. If you don't have one set up currently, you may not be able to set one up when the time comes when you need it most. During the COVID pandemic, for example, a lot of the large banks stopped offering HELOCs. You couldn't apply for them anymore because they were worried about the risk that came with it. For those that had HELOCs, potentially your line could have been closed. We saw that a little bit during the financial crisis, where lines were reduced if you didn't have a draw. So it's not a guarantee that it's there. And usually when you need cash the most, that's the type of situation where HELOCs are less available. I also don't consider cash and insurance policy as a great place to have readily available cash, because it's going to take forms, it's going to take time to process. It's usually not an easy thing where you can just click, 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 and money is there in your bank account. Don't like holding it there for that reason. Obviously, it's a way to access it if you need it, but it's usually not as easy as just having it in your bank account. I also don't love the idea of having a cash position in your IRA or 401k specifically for spending purposes, just because when you distribute that money, it's going to be taxable as ordinary income. So if you need, say, $50,000 in an emergency or something popped up, that $50,000 is going to be taxable to you when you distribute it, which means you may need to withhold even additional dollars to help cover that tax liability. I like cash in the bank readily available in most situations where there aren't going to be significant tax consequences to get to it. The last thing I'll say about where I would not hold cash is in a certificate of deposit. I know oftentimes people have that as a cash equivalent. The issue here is some CDs you can't liquidate easily, or there's a penalty for a certain amount of interest. It's just not as liquid as cash on hand. And so really when I talk about cash, I want that readily available, that there's no worry about how you're going to get to it. Each CD is a little bit different, so sometimes you can get to it. There are certain features to that, just something to be aware of in general. So if these are not the places where I keep cash, where would I keep cash? One, you could keep it in your bank account. That's a very simple one. I know it's not going to earn the most rate of interest, but again, this is something we want readily available if we need it under basically any circumstance. You could also keep it in your brokerage account. If you have a brokerage account with a custodian, you could keep your cash there. Sometimes the interest rates are lower than, say, a bank, such as an online bank, but if you want to keep it there, you could. Another potential option is a Roth IRA. I know this is a retirement account. There are certain limitations to when you can withdraw money, and it depends on whether it's contributions or earnings. We're not going to get into the technical details of that today, but you technically could have cash in a Roth IRA if other assets such as a bank or a brokerage account are not available to you, or you don't have savings there. And finally, I have gotten this question a fair amount over the years, less so frequently, but how much cash should I actually keep at home? So physically at your house. And again, the answer is going to depend here. I'm just going to share for me, it's enough to get through an emergency. If I need to go spend the night at a hotel somewhere, pick up groceries with cash, just a short-term emergency, I figure if it's longer term, I'm just out of luck. Maybe that's not the right way to think about it, but I just try to simplify it. I don't want a ton of cash at home because it can be stolen, a fire could happen, flooding. There's a whole host of things that could happen where the money's not necessarily insured or safe like it is in a bank account or somewhere else with more security and more protections. But I do know people that keep tens of thousands of dollars at home or thousands of dollars, and for them, that's a comfortable level. Again, it comes down to a personal choice and sort of what you see for the future and any regrets you may have if you don't have it on hand. Hopefully this has been helpful to learn more about how much cash you should have in retirement. Again, for me, it's mostly an emotional choice. There's not a clear-cut answer for everybody. It's thinking through what you're comfortable with and adjusting as you go along. That's the best way I can think about it. If you've enjoyed this video, please click that like button and subscribe to my newsletter with the link down below. Enjoy.